Hello and welcome to Deprogram. This is the New Culture Forum show where we do our best to fight back against ideological conformity, particularly among the young. I'm Harrison Pitt. I'm a fellow at the New Culture Forum, and I'm delighted to be joined today, as ever, by the estimable Connor Tomlinson, one of the leading contributors at Courage Media, and our guest panellist this week, Tom Jones, Conservative Councillor, regular contributor to The Critic, and the man behind the Potemkin Village Idiot Substack, to which you owe it to yourself to subscribe. Connor, the British state is not only replacing us and forcing us through unnecessarily, increasingly punitive taxation to subsidise the livelihoods of our replacement. Patrick Christys of GB News has uncovered recently, I think it went live last night, we're filming this on Thursday, that the British state, Keir Starmer in particular, is also failing to resist the likelihood of another Southport-style terrorist incident this summer. What Patrick Christys broke was that people smugglers are actually circulating pro-Salafist ISIS videos and propaganda as they're coming across the channel. Do you think this does raise the probability of another Southport this summer?
It certainly does in the future. I mean, they've exceeded now, 20,000 boat crossings this year, which is the record for the stage at which we are in the year. We're exactly at the halfway mark of 2025, so we've completed that particular milestone. Years ago, this was happening in 2015, ISIS were bragging about using Europe and Britain's permeable borders to smuggle sleeper cell agents across. Earlier this year, we arrested and detained 3 Iranian illegal migrants who had applied for asylum, who had come in on the backs of lorries and small boats from since 2016, who were just, again, living at taxpayers' expense and houses of multiple occupancy. They're far from going to be the only ones. And they've been broadcasting this for ages, even if they're not jihadists, many of which are. We know from the Casey report as of last month that a number of channel crossers have joined existing grooming and trafficking gangs in places like Bradford, Manchester, Oldham, etc. And that in the story that I helped GB News break in 2023, that North African people smugglers have long filmed British girls drunk, dressed in, let's say, immodest by Muslim standards fashion. They film them without their consent, and they're using them to market them out as sort of the spoils of war ripe for conquest to prospective illegal migrants in North Africa. So we know their violent intent well before they come over here, and yet not the previous government, not the current government, we'll see about future government perhaps, are willing to repeal all of the laws necessary to just get these barbarians out of our country.
The British state definitely is sort of testing the bounds of its own legitimacy by failing to protect us in this way. It's incredibly dangerous and incredibly reckless thing to do. Why do you think it is, Tom, that the centre-right, one thinks of people like the defence correspondent to the Telegraph, I think he's called Conor McLaughlin or something like that. He's constantly calling for bellicosity abroad, the need for greater funding to the Ukrainian effort, the need for greater funding in the Middle East, the need to build fancy nuclear submarines so that we can resist the threat that Putin and his mates pose to us and all the rest of it. Yet they seem to be completely blind to the dangers presented to us through mass immigration and indeed the demographic transformation that it is engineering and indeed the looming statelessness that it harbours.
Well, fundamentally,
it's
a very difficult conversation for a normal person to have. And if you think about defence, I actually think it is definitely right that ISIS have infiltrated at least probably in the hundreds. I think Poland closed their border with Belarus last year. I think that was under respected sensible centrist Donald Tusk, because they found that Putin was infiltrating agents and basically using migration as a weapon through Belarus straight into Poland to destabilise the country. Why it's not being picked up, I've absolutely no idea. I went on a trip to Hungary. You were on for part of, Connor, is it last year?
Yeah, we ran into each other on the plane.
Yeah. And I spoke to their border czar, and they have found extensive links with international terrorist organisations. Not necessarily at the point of transfer, so not, kind of guiding people over the border, but certainly at the beginning of the journey, particularly, obviously, in the Middle East. Why it's not being picked up as a defence issue, I've absolutely no idea. But every day I am constantly baffled by the decisions that our immigration system throws up. So that's, no great marker of anything. I think there is probably a bit of a shift coming. I've seen a couple of op-eds arguing that we should treat the border as a national security issue, and I think that will come to the fore. But I think really the bigger problem, rather than individual terrorist infiltrations, is just the scale of violence, particularly against women, that new arrivals bring. I mean, we are now, I think, per 100 cases, I think we have the highest rape rate in the developed world, which is terrifying.
Yes,
which terrifying. Mass migration is a war on women.
Yes, which reflects the fact that the threat of civil disorder and of intertribal conflict and perhaps even civil war is already latent within the fractured population. A demos that has been willfully fractured by the failure of our political elites to preserve Britain as a sort of settled homeland for Anglo-Celtic peoples, and that terrorist incidents, when they do and when they don't happen, simply trigger these sorts of this powder keg that is already in place.
Well, this won't be addressed. I mean, the egregious statistic that came out of the Southport riots was that more people were arrested for the disorderly conduct outside of the Asylum Hotel in Rotherham than the actual grooming gangs in Rotherham. So that disparity still hasn't been addressed. As far as national security, you raise an important point. I remember The Sun put out a headline, was it late last week, that said that it was actually Vladimir Putin behind all of the small boat crossings, and he's the one that's trying to destabilise Europe. Look, obvious bollocks. If you want to attach it to Putin just to have a sort of casus belli to shut down the international trafficking trade, fine. What we do know is actually that they're being financed by hawaladars, the sort of money laundering operations inside Islamic businesses in cities like Birmingham that have direct ties to people trafficking networks in Afghanistan. So we know that they're being sent from terrorist hubs straight over here, and we know that it's out of clannish ethnic and religious solidarity between these peoples that our liberal system has no antibodies to attack. And we know that there's a very strange bellicosity towards the likes of Russia and particularly China. China is listed in our strategic defence review as our economic competitor, even though we're spending loads of money on joint climate change projects with them. But at the same time, our entire university sector, even though the Chinese students come and then leave, is entirely dependent on Chinese student fees that pay a hell of a lot more, even though they don't speak the language and have fewer prohibitions against cheating, and so degrade the university sector as a whole. We are basically a sort of training centre for the sons and daughters of the CCP in elite universities, even though we're meant to be competing with them. So there is a real schizophrenia between our strategic defence goals and our immigration priorities.
There absolutely is, and if I may just say so as well, even if the Putin line is particularly absurd and self-defeating, because even if we were to assume, which is dubious, that it were true, firstly, it would be a concession that people coming across the channel do constitute a sort of demographic bioweapon. In which case, why are you not resisting them? And why not deny Putin his sweet, sweet victory by leaving the ECHR, leaving the UN Refugee Convention, opting out of certain self-defeating provisions of the Human Rights Act, and embarking on an unapologetic campaign of mass deportations? If you want to deny Putin victory,
because that's also what
Putin does. Because Belarus and Russia are the only people ever to have left the ECHR. They'll say
he's just Dennis from It's Always Sunny. He's playing both sides, so he comes out on top all the time. It's really annoying as well how our friends, newfound friends in the US State Department actually care a lot more about this than we do, because they're revisiting their sort of human rights doctrine globally and hacking back the thicket of the deep state civil service over there, and they're looking at mass immigration as a human rights violation, which for the settled indigenous peoples of Europe and the like. If they're willing to classify that, and they're willing to do that because Joe Biden let in upwards of 10 million people within 4 years, they're looking to arrest Mayorkas now for facilitating an invasion. They're willing to invoke the Alien Enemies Act and declare terror cartels like Tren de Aragua actual foreign combatants, so that they can invoke emergency powers to get them the hell out of the country. And it's because as well they had, during the Biden administration, not just like Chinese triad gangs facilitating all this trafficking as sleeper cells to move into the country, but they detected loads of terrorists from the Stan nations like Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, making their way over and walking up through Mexico. If they can acknowledge all this and we can't, it's really infuriating that the Trump administration cares more about the government and, frankly, opposition parties do about their own people here. It's just there's a total vacuum of leadership.
Don't forget the opiate flow as well. That is mostly coming through China through Mexico.
Yes, fentanyl crisis, definitely.
Hello, please excuse this brief interruption, but I'd be really grateful if you could please hit the subscribe button and subscribe to our channel. Our mission is vitally important, and we must grow this channel to ensure that our content reaches the biggest possible audience. The best way to do this is for you to subscribe. It's totally free. And in addition to subscribing, if you're able to donate or join our membership scheme, please click on the link in the description or visit our website, newcultureforum.org.uk. We've got great plans ahead, but we can't do it without your support. From only £4 per month, you'll receive a range of perks and benefits, including exclusive content. Thank you.
And it's also extraordinary as well because it's worth bearing in mind that around the time that the war on terror was being fought, it was pretty common to hear people like Tony Blair and George Bush, and indeed the very bellicose neoconservative establishment gleefully cheering them on at those moments, saying, no, don't you see, we need to fight them over there, so we don't have to fight them over here. Rather begs the question, why then are you importing them at an unprecedented scale?
Well, they weren't holding any grudges.
Well, of course they won't. If you invade their countries and destabilize the region and make it much easier for them to travel through places like Libya, I'm sure they won't hold it against you.
Could we have a radical policy proposal
Go on.
that we just don't fight them? Have we tried that?
And also don't import them.
Yeah, I mean, Libya is a great example, right? So after Lockerbie, I think diplomatic contact was only re-established by Blair, I think in something like 2007.
Sounds about right.
As a way to stem the migration flows up through sub-Saharan Africa. And Blair actually deserves some credit for this, because now it was a very unpleasant thing to do. And now without Gaddafi, Libya is basically an open channel into the Mediterranean, and there are now open slave markets in Libya.
I know. No. It's absolutely absurd. And yeah, so while it may have been in Tony Blair's gift to notice such facts, it wasn't in David Cameron's, because he obviously cheered on the dislodging of Gaddafi, which isn't to say that we particularly like Gaddafi, but why can't we have...
There are never any good choices in the Middle East.
Of course they're not. And, our foreign policy should be geared unapologetically to the interests of British people, and insofar as they diverge from those interests, they shouldn't be pursued. Very radical proposal.
Well, the modern day iteration of that is now news that they might be cooking up yet again a family reunification visa scheme for Palestinian refugees.
Indeed.
And this was debated right before the last election, where representatives of all parties. There was one particular Conservative minister who then jumped ship and went to Labour shortly after. He was trying to compete with a Lib Dem to see who could house a Palestinian refugee on their sofa first and how many. But pretty much all parties agreed, yeah, this is a great idea. Just battery farm people who hate us at our expense, who definitely won't hold a post-imperial grudge for handing over the mandate of Palestine to the state of Israel, which they want to destroy. Let's bring them all over. And the Labour minister, the shadow immigration minister, who's got a different position now in cabinet at the time, said, yeah, we've basically drafted something that's ready to go when we do get in government. And this seems to be something that everyone from sort of like sectarian Muslim MPs to devouring mother Stella Creasy is supporting. And yet we know this is absolutely going to import more terrorists. I mean, just look what happened when the Netherlands brought loads of them over. They have massive spikes in sex crimes, massive spikes in violent crime. It's almost like you can predict from the regions of the world which are racked with conflict and utterly underdeveloped, that the people that made that country are going to exact the exact same fashion if they're just dropped on the British soil.
And don't forget that, it's not just the mandate of Palestine. We have been fairly well allied to Israel ever since, and we have kept equipping them throughout this. We haven't put an arms embargo on them. So we are going to essentially bring in a population that an ally of ours has used our equipment to, rightly or wrongly, kind of irrelevant, frankly, that they have used to oppress the people that we're going to bring in.
Well, this is why it's so important that we beef up our civics programs in order to make good liberals of them, Tom.
All we need to be is a Michaela school. That's it. It's absolutely going to work.
I think Michael Gove upbraided for you that, didn't he? Do you want to share that with you?
Well, I haven't, as Douglas Murray would chastise me before, much love to Douglas, I haven't been, therefore I cannot object to the fact that the country would be run as if by a headmistress who is enforcing silence in public spaces and mandatory veganism or halal meat by your preference on the country as an integration strategy. I mean, the point being, I'm being tongue-in-cheek because of the critic piece I did, but I think the maladaptive response by, let's say, establishment, old guard Cameron conservatives and academics to the unwanted and increasing diversification and ethnic and religious stratification of our country by a multicultural management strategy has been, right, let's create a blanket identity of British values that anyone can adopt and buy into, and let's push top-down authoritarianism on the people that we've imported into this country that harbour ethnic and religious grudges against the host majority until basically the host majority and imported tribal minorities are on a kind of equal playing field because there are no differences between them. And the likelihood of doing this is just very low. I mean, look at second-generation, well-educated Muslims, 18 to 30, who believe that Hamas did nothing wrong and want to ban depictions of the Prophet Muhammad. But two, why should the British host majority population accept such a level of authoritarianism and a redefinition of their settled inherited identity, which was unmolested for over 1,000 years, to accommodate a group of people that don't like them very much, they didn't want here in the first place? And that sort of intractable thought blockage seems to still occupy the minds of those on the right.
It stems from a very idealistic view of the human person and indeed of human populations in general, that they are just this sort of raw material answerable to the good intentions of managers, and that any sort of distortions that occur as manifested in ethnic grudges, as manifested in ethnic conflict, are just simply software glitches that can be updated and altered by an improved software code. And so their response genuinely is, I wasn't just speaking tongue-in-cheek. They do think that well-designed enough liberal civics programs have it in their power to impose artificial unity on a balkanized demos.
The entire liberal, modern, progressive project is fundamentally rests on the idea of the blank slate.
Yes.
And so, therefore, disparities between outcomes and differences between groups are kind of unwelcome intrusions into reality, into that framework. And so I think what liberals have developed is a kind of relentless flattening motion, and that is most of liberal politics now, is just trying to flatten the difference between groups forever. It's like one of those, do you ever go to a modern art gallery? Probably not, looking at the paper.
Unfortunately, I've been to Tate Modern before, yeah.
You know those little machines that they always have, that there's a comb in the sand and then one that flattens it. It's that, but just forever.
That's exactly what it is, yeah.
But as much, okay, so we say liberal progressive, and I think the audience knows what we mean, but this, again, has been the doctrine, and continues to be the doctrine, frankly, of the Conservative Party as it stands. I mean, Kemi Badenoch came out last week and said we're going to replicate the de-ghettoisation policies of Denmark. And look, that's one might think that's desirable. It's a desirable alternative to having basically hostile ethnic enclaves established in our major cities, where basically these types of illegal migrants who could be ISIS sleeper cells could live in houses of multiple occupancy and given succor by the local community, or grooming gang perpetrators can fold seamlessly back in without ever having to face the shame of the people around them because they don't consider white English girls to have the same moral consideration as Pakistanis or Muslims. However, it still means that you need a centrally planned government premised on the idea that if you just position these people around the native population, they will become indistinguishable from the native population, and it means that the few shires left, that where the English have fled to out of their cities, will be subjected to something akin to Angela Rayner's Operation Scatter, where they were going to plan to just stick them all over the country anyway, and so everyone gets their fair share of diversity.
And given the scale of demographic change that we've already seen take place, it is not going to make these people British in any meaningful sense. It's simply going to ruin those parts of England that have not already gone under.
UKified.
Yeah, I mean, maybe when we have about 1,000 people to absorb, this strategy might be a workable one nationwide. But given the level of ghettoization that we have on our hands, like, relocation is not the solution. Mass deportations is the solution.
Fundamentally, I don't think there are really any integrative solutions that could be applied to the sheer weight of people that we are that we are bringing in. I think fundamentally, I mean, the idea of Britishness was completely almost eradicated by multiculturalism, very deliberately, because, multiculturalism held that all cultures are equal and there can be no dominant culture. And it was, so a sense of Britishness was completely devalued in order to apply to as many people and make their integration as easy as possible, which is why we get things like democracy, respect for democracy and respect for the rule of law. Yes, they are British values. They are also values of another 50 countries, and twee nonsense like fish and chips, Paddington Bear, and respect for our NHS.
Tea and cricket, as were the criteria laid forth as to why Rishi Sunak is English recently. I think the Indians and Pakistanis quite like cricket too. I think they actually went to war over a game in Leicester very recently.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right though, because the pressure is to be maximally accommodating, because we don't want to be associated with cultural nationalism and other such.
Or basically hard-bordered Nazi racism.
Horrific terrorist ideas, which prevent us keeping a close eye on. They might want to keep an eye on Keir Starmer, since he made that Island of Strangers speech, which seems,
he's denounced it now.
I know he has, but it still merits a close look, I suggest, by counter-terrorist or authorities, given the criteria that they themselves use.
I think he covered his arse by saying the Windrush built Britain, because remember, it is our Mayflower. Yeah. We were just unsettled wilderness.
That's penance under these circumstances.
Yes.
Penance enough under these circumstances.
But I do think the centre-right is gradually waking up to... for a long time, the centre-right has said, okay, we have to, you have to have respect for our values, and, you have to have respect for Britain and our country. And all those things, completely correct. And they have always fallen down because they have always fallen down on the, so what? Mm-hmm. Okay, so you don't have respect for our culture. Okay, so what? So what's the next step? And I think one of the shifts that is you can see every day on Twitter on the right is that a lot of the centre right is waking up to the so what problem. So that's why you're seeing much stronger calls for, mass deportations of foreign criminals. If you are a criminal, you very clearly do not have respect for our laws, and you should not be here. Mm-hmm. And it's taken the centre-right a long time to wake up to this, but you can see it coming down the track. And obviously there will always be laggards, and there will always be people behind the curve. But I think it's probably encouraging.
I definitely do agree with you, Tom, that the discourse is directionally encouraging, but that makes it even more depressing when you do encounter people still taking refuge in pseudo solutions that really belong in 2003, 2004, 2005, and the Tory party officials do appear to be special suckers for them, as indeed does our unit party elite in general. They are just about capable of noticing these problems, but insofar as they notice them, what they really try to do is to take a kind of mitigation approach to them, rather than a much more ambitious reversal approach. We see it with, the fact that very, very hideous railings have just been erected outside the House of Lords, and so to some extent, our political establishment is well aware that they have created an increasingly balkanized, fractured, low trust society, and they realize that may have negative consequences for them, but they've externalized those costs onto us, onto the population at large, while doing their best to protect their own behinds. Merkel, no doubt, similar in saying in 2015, "Wir schaffen das," we can bring all these people in, it's going to be wonderful, they're going to contribute and enrich German culture. Now that they haven't done so, I'm sure she's safe, but are the women of Germany safe? Are the women of Europe safe? Are the people of Europe safe?
And they have a continued indifference. When you said "so what," it immediately brings to mind the Sajid Javid tweet that responded to Nigel Farage, noting in the 2021 census that Britain's largest cities, particularly London, is now minority white British, and he just went, "So what?" Expressing a complete indifference to the demographic displacement of our people and the cultural and economic transformation that results from thereon by mass immigration, which was voted against in every election and referendum since 1974. And then now it puts me to mind of that, because we've got this new independent committee on community and cohesion.
Community and cohesion, not community cohesion. That's different.
Yes, quite. And you just look through the roster of all the faces and names on it, and yes, it's Sajid Javid. It's also Sundar Katwala, head of British Future, who's a former Fabian socialist, of course, and who believes there's nothing wrong with the immigration and multicultural settlement. It's Dame Sora Khan, whose sister ran Raiku, and she was the former counter-extremism advisor over at the Home Office, on whose watch the Islamic network grew to over 700 members. She stopped prioritising Prevent. They told the dead children, the parents of the dead children at Manchester Arena, don't look back in anger, so that, you know, there was no blowback on Islam. The cultural nationalism point that Prevent was supervising. So if you were reading Douglas Murray or 1984, you were actively patriotic and proud. But if you were citing hadiths on Speaker's Corner, well, go right ahead. And then you've got the likes of Fraser Nelson on there as well, who is currently saying of Matt Goodwin's research about white British becoming a minority by 2063, that's unpalatable nativism, and so therefore he's not going to pay any attention whatsoever to the mass demographic change and the actual underlying reasons why the Southport riots, the response to said massacre that we mentioned at the start, actually kicked off. They're going to be another front group to launder through the preformed conclusions of the state who have brought us to the brink of civil war, but don't actually want to do the hard work of stopping it.
And banning social media anonymity.
They've already said that. They've already said.
Really?
Yeah, one of the
out of the starter gate.
The three
Noticing is the problem.
Yeah, the three parent organisations for this is British Future from Sundar Katwala, the Together Declaration hosted by Brendan Cox, so Joe Cox's husband, and something called Belong, which markets itself as the community and cohesion charity, who fund, among other things, Muslim stargazing groups in Rochdale. Which is just horrific. And they co-wrote a paper about the Southport protests and riots in September of 2024, and the conclusion was a greater centralised integration strategy by the police and schools per the Equality Act 2010, social media censorship, and the recreation of a working group for anti-Muslim hatred, which is, of course, where Angela Rayner took her lead from and has now established it to create a new Islamophobia definition.
You can't public relations your way to social cohesion in the way that these people think you can. It's particularly absurd and amusing as well, because I think the question they have set themselves is, why is Britain so divided? And dare I say, unless they answer that question with, we're terribly sorry for replacing the British people, we apologise, and deport, this is going to be a complete waste of time and a very self-regarding and self-congratulatory one at that.
Well, I think the website, the first line in it says that the UK is a successful and thriving multi-ethnic and multi-faith democracy.
Why the need for the report?
Well, if Britain is thriving, then this is thriving. It does then go on to say, we are dealing with, some new problems and some old ones. The new problem, obviously, being social media anonymity, which must end.
The problem is only ever the far-right reaction. It's not the provocation. It is you, as you said, noticing the problem.
And saying you've noticed and telling other people to notice.
And the problem is, as well, is that there is literally no party, save a handful of MPs, independent and Tory, who are speaking about this. I mean, we've had, again, Keir Starmer resigned in a stranger speech, which he's now walked back to throw Morgan McSweeney under the bus, still perpetuated the idea that the Windrush generation built Britain. You've got Reform's new chairman, David Bull, saying, we are an island of immigrants. Immigration is the lifeblood of this country. It always has been. And then that line of Britain being a multi-faith, multinational democracy is the exact line that Michael Gove used at the dispatch box when he was announcing his new extremism definition, co-authored by Sarah Khan in March of 2024. They are still addicted to this fiction that immigration built Britain, and this slur that without diversity we would be sort of weak and feeble.
Tom, do you want your country back?
Death to the NCF. Go on. No, we have to cut that, surely.
No, that's fine. I do. Good, funny point, though. It was annoying how people in the establishment centre right were more perturbed about protecting the reputation of the IDF, who I think, as a very competent military, can probably defend themselves. They spent the last 2 years blowing up every jihadist in Islay. I think they can handle some moronic race communist at Glastonbury saying mean words about them, versus the sort of gleeful revelling in the fact that he feels that, with state assistance, by the way, he has confiscated this country from the Gammons, basically the indigenous population, and is then crowd-surfed by a few thousand white middle-class, likely civil servants.
So I've always had this idea about Israel. I think Israel is basically works as a kind of cipher for certain people on the centre-right. I think because it is unashamedly quite militaristic. It has national service for men and women. It is quite. It's more culturally and ethnically, less culturally and ethnically homogenous than you would expect. There's quite a large population of Arabs, and also, a Jew is not a Jew. There are Merazim and Ashkenazi that are from, all kinds of different parts of the world. But it's very, very culturally chauvinistic. and I think to some extent ethnically chauvinistic. And I think there is a certain kind of person who feels much more comfortable, who likes the idea of what Israel is, but is not comfortable arguing for it for themselves.
I think I know why that is as well. Because for one thing, the people, centre-right, Gentile politicians in Britain can live vicariously through this sort of nationalistic assertiveness that they feel forbidden from doing so in their own country. And it also offers a very kind of plausible way of giving that sort of nationalistic assertiveness a protective minoritarian garb. Because you can say that I'm doing this for the Jews, who in Britain are a minority, but it's under kind of left modernist moral presuppositions. It is majorities who are who warrant suspicion, not minorities. And because people in the centre-right can reach for, can frame their Israelophilia as advancing the interests of a minority, in Britain at least, that is to say, the Jewish minority living in Britain, they feel as though they feel more able to do that, and they feel that they can make that sound respectable in the way that they don't think that they can make it sound respectable if you're talking about defending the collective interests of the British majority.
I don't think any of us have hostility to Israel around the table. I think the thing that we often say, and politicians on our side of the aisle should be saying, is just that, Israel is sort of the example of a very religious and ethnically self-conscious state with high GDP per capita, an effective military, high and above replacement birth rates, and a cool martial art. Why can't we just copy that? Like, I want the Israeli model of statehood for the British, and it would be just as much a tragedy if the continuing state-sponsored dispossession of the British from their own country is completed, as it would be a tragedy, and was a tragedy for the Jews when they lost the Second Temple, and if Israel were to be destroyed. I mean, if Israel reached a demographic tipping point where atheism set hold, or the Jews were no longer the sort of dominant host majority, there might be a few million Arabs there, but it is unquestionably still a Jewish state, and it's spoken of in that terms abroad. If it fell off that tipping point, it would be an existential threat. Yet, I mean, Danny Kruger goes on Newsnight, and a few days only after having been at the Now in England conference and sort of joining Robert Toombs in being unable to identify an Englishman and unwilling to put it in similar terms, he then goes and criticises Bob Vylan for his anti-Semitism, not the fact that we in Britain seem to have gone over the edge of that demographic and cultural tipping point, and those who feel the beneficiaries of it, sort of resentful anti-white race communists, are now gleefully celebrating it live on the BBC.
We live under very perverse and unjust minoritarian double standards that classes. I mean, I think people like Michael Gove will even say this. He will say things like, to be anti-Zionist, in other words, not to uphold the right of the Jewish people to self-determination in their own homeland, isn't just anti-Zionism, that is a cover for anti-Semitism. And yet when we say that we want to get a similar kind of collective nationality going in Britain, that is classed similarly as sort of white supremacy. So these are very perverse double standards, and we would do well to break through them as soon as possible. And as Conor says, the IDF can absolutely take care of itself and can no doubt take care of Israel as well. But who is going to look out for us? Who's going to look out for the British people, if not our native centre-right? Yet they seem to be busy elsewhere. What do you think of the splintering competition on the right at the moment, Tom? We have, as Katie Hopkins was, I think, joking the other day, quite amusingly, Restore with Britain. We have Reclaim. We have Reform. We have the Conservative Party, perhaps even a power struggle within that. How do you see all of these pieces falling over the next four years or so?
Well, the British right is doing what it's always done best, which is massively duplicating effort to basically no benefit whatsoever. Like, the left is really good at having people play their part and having very big institutions, things like the Fabian Society, that just do fantastic things, and they are very good at avoiding duplication of effort. And they are very good at building single big blocks that basically the left goes to because it's got no other choice, because it's the only thing that exists. And they're, with Corbyn, there was a little bit of splintering away from that. People stopped reading, let's say, Labour List, and they started reading The Canary. But, compared to the... and I have to be careful what I say here, because obviously...
As a Conservative councillor.
Yes, and also I wrote for quite a lot of these places, and go on these places podcasts quite a lot. there is a massive duplication of effort on the right, and it has always been this. It's always been like this. I think probably there's something to do with the socialist sense of shared endeavour rather than probably shared profit on the right,
and also probably a sense that is also very socialist. The place to litigate these disputes is the committee,
yes.
not the public sphere.
Yeah, but fundamentally, a lot of these things will probably actually not be here in 5 years.
Well, one thing I will say is that I think that a very clever move that Rupert Lowe has made in making Restore Britain not a political party so much as a movement / think tank / policy unit / content creation platform and all the rest, is that it gives you a certain amount of institutional flexibility.
Yes. And
mixes that with a sort of philosophical fixedness, because in other words, the principles are cast iron. They're written down. We know what they know what they stand for. Rupert Lowe is sort of making a bid to be the kind of the North Star of right-wing politics in Britain, which of course means you have to be fixed because you need to stick by your principles. But understanding that institutional flexibility is going to be rewarded at a time of immense political volatility like this, and there's however the chips end up falling, I see no reason why a place like Restore Britain in say 2027 or 2028 couldn't come online as a political party if there was the appetite for it.
Yeah, I think if I were to predict how things are going to land very shortly, I really can't see past Nigel Farage being the next Prime Minister. As things currently stand, I really can't. Labour are they're a disaster, frankly. It's terrible what they're doing. They are absolutely awful, and I don't think they're going to get much better, even if they change leader, which I question whether they can or have the will to do. As things stand with the Conservatives, we ain't getting back into power. And so I cannot see past Nigel Farage as the next Prime Minister. And I cannot see him lasting more than a term, because Nigel Farage is a really big media personality. There are some things that Nigel Farage does incredibly well, and I suspect governing is not going to be one of them. So already they've had a problem with one of their councils. I think Warwickshire, they had this flag mandate. They will only fly the British flag and also maybe the county flag. And the chief executive of, I'm sure it's Warwickshire, has already basically come out and said, no, I'm going to decide that. And Nigel Farage has come out and made a video, which is great for campaigning, but you are actually in government now, and you have promised to not fly those flags, so what? And basically, I think
the Sajid move, the Sajid Javid move.
I think Farage will speed run the Tory governance problems, right? Which is fundamentally that the decision space of our politicians has been massively constrained on all sides and all fronts by legal constraints, fiscal constraints, international agreements, institutional bureaucracy, and public opinion that is quite often astroturfed by the blob and blobbish institutions, right? And basically, the fundamental problem that British politicians face is to simply expand that decision space and rewire the state so that you increase the freedom of your politicians to take decisions and then be held democratically accountable for them. And I don't think Farage has that within him. I know he's spoken to Liz Truss about the problems of governing, which, to be fair,
she'd be the person to talk to.
She would be the person to talk to, but also when Liz Truss talks about the blob, she uses it as a cipher for her own failings a lot of the time. And actually, there is a very serious structural framework to the blob about how charities, institutions, NGOs work with each other and with the civil service and with funding charities to shape public opinion, and work with government as stakeholders and stakeholdees.
Why not?
And actually, there is a solution to all of this, but Liz Truss does not have it. She just uses the blob as a cipher for her own governance failings.
What would the solution be that you think is lacking? Because as far as I understand it, she, Rupert, a series of Tory ministers, I think, under the advice of David Starkey, Rob Jenrick has called the same thing, a sort of great repeal or restoration bill that builds up, that hacks away at the thicket of legislation that has put the civil service as the on-rails actual government of the country. And this isn't just the settlements of Tony Blair and the Constitutional Reform Act, the Constitutional Reform and Governance Act, and Equalities Act and Human Rights Act and all these things. But it's also things like the Race Relations Act, the 1948 British Nationality Act, basically rolling it back, as Dominic Cummings has advised, back to before Northcote Trevelyan, and making the civil service be accountable to parliamentary sovereignty again. Is that not the solution? Is there something they're missing?
No, I think in the long term, that's where you have to go. Obviously, there are very specific issues about the blob. I mean, to be honest, you could just solve it by turning off money taps that we, keep money flowing.
Bank of England go brr.
Yeah. I think probably the most fundamental thing we need to do is radically reprioritise what the state is, and most importantly, what it does. This was a huge missed thing in austerity. What the Tories decided to do, what we decided to do, was rather than question what the state was for and what the state should do, they just decided to rail everything back just a little bit, apart from pensions, for some reason.
They treated it as a problem of scale, not of function.
Yes. And basically, as soon as the money tap started being turned on a little bit, again, everyone wanted more money because there was suddenly more money in the system, and that generated more demand for the money. So I think, like Anglo-futurism was a big thing at now in England, and
the conference.
Yeah. If you talk to the people who came up with Anglo-futurism, they quite often say the reason we can't do it is state capacity. I simply don't believe that. We have the highest tax burden since the Second World War, the highest level of public spending since the 1970s. We have the highest civil service headcount for a quarter of a century.
Yeah, we're higher, the largest civil service per capita than Communist China at the moment.
Yeah.
In history.
The state has never had so much capacity as it does right now. The problem is it does not want to build a spaceport. It does not want to fix your road because it wants to do other things.
It's full of morons, Islamists, and gay race communists. That's just it. Sorry,
trying in their own way to change human nature. Well, there's no doubt at all, Tom, that we do live at a time of unprecedented, once-in-a-century political ferment, and in that, under those conditions, it probably would be unwise at this early stage, as we're only in 2025 after all, next election 2029, to underestimate the Conservative Party. It has. I'm not saying that it will necessarily revive, but it has historically had it in its gift to reinvent itself. And in our extra members section, we will be asking you some very particular questions about some of the power struggles, personal power struggles and ideological power struggles that are raging within that honourable party at the moment. But thank you for joining us up until now, Tom. It's been a privilege talking to you. Connor, thank you very much. As ever, you've been watching Deprogrammed. If you'd like to catch the extra members section with me, Connor Tomlinson and Tom Jones, do consider signing up as a member. But for now, thank you for watching the video. Make sure to like, subscribe, do leave a comment if you'd like to do so, and we shall see you on the next.
Our mission at the New Culture Forum is and always has been to defend and celebrate Britain's history, culture and its people, and indeed Western civilization, at a time when both are under sustained attack. We have grown from small beginnings to become the country's most influential right-leaning cultural think tank. Our content is watched and read by some of Britain's most influential political figures. But now, we need your help. If you believe in what we do, then please do become a member. For as little as £4 a month, you can make a vital contribution to what we do. As a member of the NCF family, you will help ensure that we can continue to produce quality content online, such as our 3 weekly programmes, Whittle, which is our flagship interview show, Newspeak, our panel discussion show, and Deprogrammed, which is targeted at Britain's youth. As you probably know, in addition, we produce important documentaries, such as our critically acclaimed 6-part series, The West, a stunning celebration of the history and genius of Western civilization. And our ongoing documentary series, Heresies, with hard-hitting episodes tackling subjects such as immigration, gender ideology, and BBC bias. But the New Culture Forum is much more than a YouTube channel. We don't just complain about Britain as it is, we provide real solutions and clear policies on how we can push back against the madness and restore sanity to this nation. Our presenters are now highly sought after and have become familiar faces across the media. Our prestigious annual Smith Lecture and our regional and indeed national conferences have attracted world-class speakers. Perhaps most importantly, we are the only organisation on the right of politics that has launched a national movement without actually being a political party. And uniquely, through our NCF Locals programme, we've established some 30 active branches in towns and cities right across the nation, from Edinburgh to Exeter, and with many more on the way. We're very proud of what we've achieved, and our members have made it possible. In return, our members receive access to exclusive content, invitations to private events, free or discounted tickets to our conferences and lectures, free copies of our books, and much more. I very much hope that you'll join us too by clicking the link in the description or going to our website, newcultureforum.org.uk. Now is the time that we need your help. Thank you.